think an unleashed leader is someone that has been given kind of the space, the trust, the support to really challenge the norms and understands that it's through their teams that they lead that they're able to be successful leaders, that they're not only leading teams, but that they take care of those team members and provide them the support that they need to be successful, but also walks with them when there's challenges and failures.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are joined by Stephanie Clendenin. She is the director at the Department of State Hospitals for the state of California. Stephanie has been a long-term friend, ally, and client in multiple aspects, and she brings tremendous skills in being able to bring unity out of an organization that's got a lot of diversity. And she also has a remarkable talent for being able to know when and how to move between the high level and the details in a way that brings people further together. Stephanie, thank you for coming to our show today and sharing some of your tips.
Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your current role in your organization. I mean, the scale and size and significance of it is really remarkable.
So I serve as the director for the California Department of State Hospitals. We operate the state's forensic mental health hospital system. We serve individuals with serious mental illness who are justice involved and are committed to the department by the California Superior Courts, our state's Board of Parole, or our inmates at our California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation who need inpatient mental health care. Last year, we served over 13,000 individuals across our continuum of care. We operate 5 state hospitals. They range from about 800 to 1,500 beds each. And we also serve individuals in the community and in jail-based programs as well through partnerships that we have with county behavioral health agencies, sheriffs, and private providers. We're considered in state government what is to be a large state department, and we have over about 12,000 employees.
Yeah, you guys are like the third largest, I think, or so, third or fourth, given, any given day, right? Of one of the state agencies, but kind of a secret agency, right? And so not as well known, and hopefully we'll change that a little bit today because you got a lot of great things going on there. But your journey didn't start at state hospitals. And so for those who aren't familiar with state government, how has your career journey gotten you here?
Well, the story goes back a little bit. It's definitely going to show my age a bit. It's also a little bit of a long and kind of winding journey from where I started to where I am now. I have over 34 years of service in the state of California, and across those 34 years have held 16 different positions. I have had many different positions with various different state departments. I can say I really also benefited greatly from the upward mobility opportunities that working in state government has to offer.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I think that folks don't realize is any state, whether, it's, Arkansas or Minnesota, is that, the state is an organization and it's got all the different disciplines and functions. So what's cool about it is you can have a career that twists and turns and winds from finance to transportation to education or whatever it is. And you don't actually ever leave the technical bounds of the organizations, but they can have wildly different cultures, right? Wildly different programs and missions. What were a couple of the ones that you worked at prior to state hospitals, just kind of by name and function, just to get a sense of that variety?
Yeah, so I started at the Department of General Services. That's kind of the organization that provides kind of the administrative and supportive services for the state departments. And I actually started there in their accounting office, and this is actually going to really date me because I started there when I was 19 years old, and I worked as a typist.
Do not tell me you used a slide rule. Okay, just don't go there.
No, I used a typewriter.
Okay, all right.
That's typing tool. So
that's tolerable.
That's not computers. So yes. And I also worked worked in the mailroom. So that's where I got my kind of start in state government. I really worked in the accounting office there. I quickly transitioned out of that role and into an entry level accounting position when kind of the management team realized I had an affinity for numbers and kind of accounting principles. And so I worked there for in a couple of roles and kind of line level accounting roles, and then transitioned over to the Department of Healthcare Services. That is actually an organization that no longer exists in the state government. And then from there, I found my way to the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. That's where I met you, Reed. I spent a majority of my career there, actually, about 18 years of my career at that organization, where I held multiple leadership roles there. I actually left that department twice and came back. I worked for the Department of Finance for a little bit, as well as Cal Fire for a little bit, and then came back to OSHPD, where I then kind of that's when I started to make my transition to executive leadership there. And then from OSHPD came to where I am now at the Department of State Hospitals.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so, yeah, it's like, you're looking back, you would never may have had anticipated that kind of a journey, but then looking in the review, you're able to see like, oh, hey, each one of these gave you a unique piece or unlocked a particular skill or ability that made you better prepared for the next step. I'm sure there were many, but what's one formative moment in your career that really started to shape your intentional view of leadership?
I'd have to say that was mid-career. It was actually the first time I applied for an executive leadership position, and I didn't get the position I applied for. And actually, it was the first time in my state career I applied for a position that I didn't get at all.
Mhm.
Every time I had applied prior to that, I had gotten the position. So it was a bit of a moment for me,
Yeah.
that rejection moment. So this was back when I was the chief of the accounting office at OSHPD, and I was applying for the deputy director over the administrative services position. I was a well thought of leader at the time. I really thought I had a good chance of being chosen for the position, but in the end, didn't get it. But it was in the feedback that the director at the time gave me, and the support that the person who was actually hired as the deputy director gave me, that really helped me understand how leaders can really support the growth and development of an individual, and how important feedback is to an individual. I've always been kind of a self-motivated person, and just really always did well and never really, needed feedback. But in that moment, I needed that feedback. And when I didn't get the position, the director provided me some just really great feedback. He basically sat me down and said, we value you.
Mhm.
We see you as an executive leader in the future. But right now, all of your experience is in accounting, and a majority of that time is within our department. So you really just don't have the breadth of experience, not only, in the functions that you would be responsible for as the deputy director of administration, but also really don't have a really good understanding of how state government more broadly works.
Yeah.
So he actually encouraged me to seek other opportunities to expand my knowledge and experience, and even said that that might mean I need to leave the department and go get other experiences in other departments to
Yeah.
help me be a more competitive candidate in the future. And then if that wasn't enough, then the person who came in as the deputy director, I shared with him that I had applied for I applied for your position,
Yeah.
buddy.
Yeah. So I'm gonna
And
be gunning for you every day
then,
you're here, buddy.
and I also shared the feedback that I'd received from the director, and he was so incredibly supportive. He said his goal then would be to help me be ready for the position when and if he ever decided to leave it.
Yep.
So he set out to give me experiences and special projects in the other areas outside of the accounting that were under administrative services, like human resources and budgets and kind of
Yeah.
our contracting office, so that I could broaden my knowledge and experience. And I was a sponge. I wanted any opportunity I could get. But then
Well,
I
when
also,
you think about that moment, Stephanie, like how much more hungry were you to learn and absorb that having not gotten the job than if you had gotten the job?
oh, I was really hungry.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah. Right. And I I,
yeah.
I want to highlight that because I think sometimes as leaders, and we've all had it. I've had my setbacks. You've had them. Everybody's had them. And some of them were fair and justified, and some of them were not, right? But they were still setbacks. And what I found is that as much as it might hurt in the moment and it might be, frustrating, a little bit of that sets you up to be able to go faster. It's kind of like that slingshot. Like you got to pull the slingshot back, tighten that rubber band, and then boom, it just shoots forward. Whereas if you just went forward, it'd be kind of a, just an incremental step. So I'm hearing that like, okay, all right, well now I'm on it.
Yeah. So I'm getting all of this great experience, but I'm also reflecting on what the director had to share about getting other experiences as well outside of accounting and the administrative services and in other departments. So that's when I left the accounting role that I was in and I transitioned to a program area in that department under at OSHPED. So I was now in a program area, the facilities development division. And then,
I didn't know you had worked directly in facilities. That cracks me up.
yeah,
Okay.
and yeah,
Mm,
I did to get some kind of like programmatic experience.
yeah.
That's the move I made. And then I sought an opportunity from there at another department. That's when I moved to Cal Fire. And then eventually I spent
Literally out of the frying pan into the
the
fire,
fire.
right? Yes. Well, you take feedback well, Stephanie.
You give me feedback, I am definitely going to put it into motion.
And that's another, I think, key leadership insight is that, it's not how much you know, it's how fast you're willing to learn, right? Because somebody else might know more than you, have more experience, have better connections, have better resources, whatever. But if you're willing to learn fast, you will always catch and surpass whoever's got more, but they're just sitting on it, right? That's awesome. Well, one of the things that I've had literally a front row seat to be able to collaborate with you on, witness, and observe is a very powerful skill that you have, and I can see now why you have it because you learned the importance of breaking out of a silo, right, and being able to get that horizontal view so that you can then better integrate and that is the ability to bring unity and build the associated community with that, out of an organization that is fairly siloed. And I just want to pause for a second before we dive into this to kind of when you say the word siloed, a lot of folks have a very negative connotation, right? It's like, oh, you're siloed, you've done something wrong, you've had horrible leadership, you're a terrible company. Why do you exist? And I first of all want to validate that silos are not bad. Right. I mean, you need specialization. You need to divide and conquer the work. You're going to have different programs and different product lines. You have different constituents. So all of those are natural forces that kind of drive towards, individualizing and separating and segmenting things so work can get done. So in that sense, it's not bad. I think that what we recognize is that if that's the only force that's allowed to work, then it kind of can push it to an extreme, right? And then you're not getting the integration, the collaboration, and the unity you need to orchestrate in a common effort. It's like, at Oshpit, for example, right? Like you have the Cal Mortgage doing the funding, you've got facilities doing the buildings, you've got, IT and data doing the analysis of the data. And they're all different programs, but they're all serving the same constituent class, which is the healthcare organizations and workforce, and for the same beneficiaries, which are the citizens, right? And so, if we're not thinking laterally, then we can really miss those opportunities. So tell us about that moment when you came back to Oshped and you recognize that okay, I've now got this broader perspective, and I'm seeing the silos, and I'm seeing the degrees to which they're not just helpful, but actually detrimental.
When I was chief deputy director at the department and getting to really better understand, in the accounting level, I worked with everybody, but didn't really see how the divisions did or did not work together. Really, I worked with each one of them, but didn't get to see how they cross operated. At the chief deputy director level, I really got an opportunity to see that. Right now, responsible for all of these operating divisions, and was very apparent that they operated in silos. They had their very distinct business lines, as you mentioned, and they didn't even really know what each other was working on, what that was important to one another. There wasn't a lot of commonality or even policy issues between the programs. There really wasn't any collaboration that really
Yeah.
went on.
Yeah. And
Um,
each of those programs is big enough to consume your focus, right? I mean, it's like, Cal Mortgage doing the financing for your construction projects and, facilities to maintain all the regulations. Like those were big, big programs. So you can kind of see like, hey, look, I got my hand full of my own stuff. Like I don't have capacity to even think about your stuff.
were meeting our goals and objectives in each one of those individual business lines. So it wasn't detrimental in any way. It just there was just opportunity, and opportunity actually kind of
Yep.
presented itself during that the time when I was chief deputy director. That's when the Affordable Care Act was
Mm.
enacted, and that really provided a catalyst for us to really think about the department differently and how we were going to be relevant in this kind of changing healthcare landscape. This is also a time now when information technology I'm kind of advancing my years here. Information technology was prevalent, and each of the programs now had data. They had data systems. They had collected relevant program data. And so now there's so much opportunity really to think about the department in a new way, to figure out those commonalities between the programs and how we could work together and we could leverage the data across the programs to inform health policy for California. So at that time, then that's when we engaged in a strategic planning effort for the department to really develop a plan that reflected this new direction of a kind of a singular department working
Yeah.
together towards common goals and objectives versus the more siloed approach that we had had before.
Okay, I got to show it. There it is. There's the cup from that experience. I still have it on my desk 10 years later, Stephanie.
And what does it say?
It says one Oshped working together, right? And we had, but the thing was this, and this is so common in many organizations, public or private, where, up to that date, there'd always been a strategic plan, but the strategic plan was goal A was program A. Goal B was program B. Goal or business line A, business line B, substitute the thing, right? And it was like, but wait a minute, what's the shared unifying goals? Like, what's the collective impact that we're going for here? And it was just kind of like, well, if we just do all the different parts of baking the cake, well, then at the end there'll be a great birthday. But that was like assumed, and it wasn't front and center. And so you guys brought it together. It's like, okay, hey, but why are all of these things happening? And what is the shared collective impact here? That was a big shift. And it was kind of like, well, and you're like, well, no, I don't. What is it? And so what were some of the things that you did to kind of help elevate your deputies' thinking and bring that cohesion together?
I think it was around the Affordable Care Act and really thinking through, how we really were going to try to be relevant in this new space and talking through those, where are those touch points that are where is that commonality, between where can we find that commonality across our programs so that we can think through how we could do things differently to find and better understand our healthcare system across the state and how to better tackle the workforce development challenges that we have in the state. So it was really just those trying to really get together and figure out how we can work together and what that commonality was.
So you use the external conditions, right, of this changing marketplace. And, I like to use the expression, never waste a crisis. So like, here this big thing is coming and there's the opportunity with the technology. And so it's just asking the questions, where are the underutilized opportunities? Where are the areas of collaboration that we could pursue? Now, that's all positive and wonderful. Was there any resistance to that? They were like, oh, sure, let's just do that. Like, what was some of the pushback maybe or impediments that you encountered with that invitation?
Definitely, there was resistance, not across everybody, but there were definitely, I would say, in the leaders who had been with the organization the longest and had been, had a lot more historical context and
Mhm.
how the department had operated in the past and were very comfortable in that. I would say our more newer leaders really weren't rooted in that. So it was a little bit easier for those conversations. But definitely, I think it was just more protection and comfort in what we're
Yeah.
already doing,
Yeah.
and not necessarily. Um, Nothing was bad. It's just helping them to see why it's important that we need to go in this new direction and
Yeah.
helping them to come to that understanding.
Yep. And the flavor was more like, hey, I'm kind of overwhelmed and full. So it wasn't resistant because I have an aversion to the idea. It's just like, I'm tapped out. Right. And I've been at this a long time and my hands are full. So there's just not room for something new. And yet those very folks, I remember being so critical to the process because they've been around, they knew where the opportunities were. And so getting their participation was really essential. And then you also had the folks that were more open to it because they hadn't gotten to capacity yet, but then they didn't know where the opportunities were as well. So it was like we had to take both of those kind of spectrums of leaders and bring them together. And there was some persistence. There was also using a charming and dynamic facilitator, I think might have helped. But that those things brought it, together. And we knew also that it wasn't going to be everything all at once. I think the other key thing that you guys did different is like going, hey, we don't need to integrate and collaborate on everything, but here are a few key top of mind opportunities that are very relevant at this time, and let's just start the journey. Right. And then knowing that over the next several years, we'll find new ones and then we'll expand it. So you did it in a very focused, incremental fashion. And that also made it less overwhelming and scary. So those would be a couple of things that I recall from that experience. So now what's fascinating to me then is like, so you did that and I got, like you said, front row seat, got to witness the transformation, and it continues to this day, by the way. So be very proud of that. But then you went to state hospitals and you went from chief deputy to chief deputy at state hospitals and then eventually director. Now, state hospitals, a little different flavor where in the sense like, okay, there's less diversity of programs than there was at OSHPD. I mean, OSHPD, you had bankers and construction and data people. Like, how could those people even coexist in the same room, right? But at state hospital, you have all, lots of clinical administrators, all psychiatric kind of emphasis, but you had 5 very different geographies. And within those, you had specialties and of programs. So it's a different kind of variety and silos. So tell us about that scenario. What made that different? And then what did you, again, intentionally, deliberately do to build this progressive sense of unity?
DSH was coming to the Department of State Hospitals was an interesting transition because not only, as you describe it, we're talking about going from an organization and building unity across an organization of 450 versus an organization of 12,000 employees,
That,
right?
yeah,
So,
you added a couple zeros there. Yeah.
yeah, but basically the same process. So I think just to back up a little bit about what the department was going through at the time when I joined it. So the department actually was a relatively new department that was created in 2012, a couple years before I joined the department. And the state hospitals used to actually be a smaller arm of a larger department of mental health that was really responsible for the broader mental health system in California. In 2012, that department was decommissioned, and many of the roles and responsibilities were transferred to other departments. And for the state hospital programs, the new Department of State Hospitals was created to operate the hospitals as a system of care.
Okay.
Under the prior department, so going back to the prior department, they were under one division under that department, and they did have kind of headquarters oversight, but they generally operated as individual hospitals. There wasn't a tremendous amount of system-wide thinking, the policies, the procedures, collaboration, and commonality across the hospitals that you would expect from a hospital system. So when I joined the department, while they were kind of moving in this direction, there was still a lot of resistance to this movement towards being a hospital system. This effort was really still in its infancy, even though we were a couple of years in when I joined. And at that time, I would say they're also, while they were moving in this direction, they didn't necessarily have a fully developed strategic plan. They had gone through an effort to develop the vision and the mission. And so they had that kind of articulated. And they definitely had their goal values identified, but there wasn't any clear goals on how we were all going to work together to accomplish the mission and vision. So once I came to the department, really before it could do anything, I really had to stop and build the trust and rapport with the team. Then we kind of once we got through that period, then and fought the daily fires. Then we kind of embarked on developing a full strategic plan, and that was not an easy effort in this organization. It was much more difficult, I would say, than what I experienced over at OSHPD. There is over 100 years of history in some of our state hospitals.
Yeah.
So,
And you've got rural, you've got urban,
yeah,
right? You've got, higher security, lower security. I mean, it's just, but these folks, these institutions existed before there was ever even a department,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So it was really, we had to manage through some really difficult conversations, kind of get through this historical context and ultimately come up with this shared vision, mission, goals, and really finalize that strategic plan that we're all kind of shared, and had a part in voice in the development. We actually even had to change contractors along the way. And once again, you and I partnered on this, but the first contractor we hired, we actually was really challenged with helping us to facilitate those productive, kind of almost healing conversations we had to have around coming together as an organization and moving through kind of and past that rooted history and into our future. So that was a really challenging strategic planning effort that we went through. But ultimately, we ended up on the other side that, once we had that common shared vision and direction and goals, then the future got easier. The
Yeah.
conversations got easier. We all had that common understanding of where we were headed, and we're still very different. The hospitals still have their own cultures. They're still, have their own diversity of thought, but we are so much more together and operate now as a system and think about each other across the system as we act and make decisions rather than each, hospital or portion of our organization working in their silo.
And they're phenomenal programs. I mean, I've had the privilege of being, I think, in almost every one of your hospitals, not as a customer, but as a guide to clarify that. And they are there. I mean, it's really remarkable what they do and how what a difficult environment it is to work in. I mean, your workforce, the thing that jumps out to me over and over and over again is the level of care and compassion and commitment that shows up every single day for a job that very few human beings would say, hey, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And yet it is so important. It is so essential. And if any of us were ever in that moment, that's what we would want. So you have that as a huge asset. And but it was very like, in this case, the resistance, was less, I'm overwhelmed, don't bother me. It was more of like, hey, I've got a really difficult thing to do and I know how to do it. And I got a proven track record for doing it. So don't disrupt me, right, was kind of more of the flavor. And it's just a different, manifestation of that. But you mentioned, you kind of said it as an aside, but it's like, hey, I had to build the trust first, right? You didn't get to come in because you had the title and say, okay, now hear this, because, it was a very decentralized organization. You built the trust. And then you said, we emphasized creating not just a mission, but we had to emphasize the goals in order to unite the roles. Clarify and unite on your goals, that will naturally help you align on your roles. Like there's that order of operations there. And you're right, it wasn't easy. And then just lots of follow-up conversations of, following up with leaders, inviting them to the dance, showing them where the benefits were, respecting where there were still boundaries. They still have boundaries, right? That's totally fine. I mean, that's kind of the sequence, right? Trust, strengthen and unite on the goals, have some healing conversations, and then follow up with lots of conversations. I mean, that sounds simple, easier said than done, but if you distilled it out, that's kind of the sequence I'm hearing here, Stephanie.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did.
So I want to zoom in on a particular practical skill that I've heard from many of the folks who work with you, and I don't even think you realized it until they pointed it out. But the description was one of the things that Stephanie does really, really well as a leader is that you're able to understand how and when to be at the high level of the vision and the strategy and when to zoom into the details. I think for a lot of leaders, either they stay in the high level, but they don't practically connect, or they're completely stuck in the weeds and they're a micromanager, right? And so then there's this debate of like, which one's better? And the reality is it's an and, right? And so you got this reputation from being able to do both. Could you share with us what kind of goes through your mind when you get a sense where you're like, you know what, I really kind of got to get my hands into this one? And then how do you do that so it doesn't alienate people? And then how do you extract so you get back out and get back to the high level? Like there's a knack you have for that I think leaders can really benefit from.
Yeah, when I really think about this, because it really is more instinctual when I zoom in and zoom out what's happening, right? And it really does have to do with how things are going, I think. For me, setting a direction. It's all about setting a direction. We have a goal, we have a new policy direction, then giving the leader the space to develop the plan on how they are going to achieve. And if they ask for guidance along the way, at that point, it isn't about doing the work for them or solving the problem for them. It's really at that point, I'm still kind of high level and providing them feedback along the way.
Yeah.
Then when I focus in, it really, there's kind of like three areas when I feel like when I focus in. One is when my spidey senses go up, right? Like something doesn't quite feel right. Something that I'm hearing, what I'm seeing in the numbers, in the data that they're in outcomes that they're producing. And so at that point, I need to dig in with the leader a little bit more to kind of figure out what is giving me that sense that something just isn't quite right. Then another time when I kind of usually drop down in a little bit deeper is when something isn't going right. So this is about dropping in and being there alongside the leader to work through to figure out what happened, how to solve the issue, kind of how to find a path forward, and sometimes even helping them to do damage control.
Mhm.
And then I would say the third time that usually I'm dropping down in a little deeper is when something has really become politically sensitive, and the team is going to need the air cover. That's
Okay.
when kind of we are in the thick together and working to ensure that we can be successful, even given all the sensitivities that are happening around whatever it is we're working on. I would say those are kind of the primary times when our team members or our leaders will feel me kind of start to drop down a little
Drop
lower
in.
than I
Those
normally
those
can.
spidey sense, things have gone wrong, and the third one is things haven't necessarily gone wrong, but it's got such a level of visibility. You want to be there to be prepared to offer the air support should things start to go a little sideways. Do you have a specific example of when you've done this, in the last year? You've probably done it 30 times. What's one example and then how did that fall into that category of, spidey sense wrong or air cover?
I would say on the kind of like politically sensitive realm, and it's been going on for many, many years, we have seen an increase in demand for our services for one particular type of commitment that we serve in our hospitals. And we had wait lists and longer wait times to services for our programs. And a few years ago, there was a very significant investment in resources to allow the department to implement new programs and expand services to try to address that. And I would say that's an example of an area where there's a large investment happening. There is a lot of focus on the
Ability.
department
Yeah.
and, ensuring that we have good outcomes with that funding, that we are addressing the challenge that we were asked to solve. And so I would say that around that issue, I'm very involved.
Yeah.
I'm tracking with the programs, the data. I'm understanding the rollout plans of the programs a little bit more than I would typically on something that's been longstanding and operating well.
So it's acute, it's visible, right? There's a significant investment. It's novel. The uncertainty factor is higher. So then just to round us out here, then Stephanie, tell us a little about, so now you've decided this is an area that warrants my focus and zooming in. How do you do it where you don't alienate the very leaders who are trying to do it, but you make sure that you stay on track? So how do you enter into that scene? You're like, okay, I know I need it. How do you do that?
I think it's really about giving them the understanding before I dig in why I'm headed in that direction.
Okay.
Also just, helping them to understand that we're kind of all in this together. We're in the successes together. We're in the failures together. And kind of that, this is really kind of a high priority issue. Like in that example, that, we are going to win together or we're going to lose together. And I'm walking lockstep with them in that kind of journey. So I think it's really, just making sure that they really know why before I dig in, why I'm kind of dropping down into that level that where I don't always operate in, so that they're not surprised by it, but also, can understand it and be comfortable in me being there with them in that level.
Well, once again, you're sharing this example, Stephanie. This is such a trend. Like you're like, I help them understand why. And that goes back to that clear goal. What's the contribution? What's the purpose? Right. Before we talk about roles, let's talk about goals. And then you really clearly signal we're in this together, right? It's one OSHPD together, it's one organization together, it's unity. And hey, how do we get there together? So those are like two steps that you're doing and you're locking in before you start saying, okay, now on policy X, you need to change page 3 to, put the comma before the this, right? Like if, if you just zoom in and you snap on that level of detail and you haven't established the why and you haven't established the connection, even if you're 100% right, like it's going to get deflected and blocked, but you're doing that preamble work to make them ready and right to receive it. And it's worth it. Like it takes time to do that, to talk about the why and the connection. So then you're there in the moment, you're giving them feedback. All right. And then there's that moment where they're receiving it and, maybe they feel guilty that they didn't see it, or maybe they feel bad that you had to get involved, or like there's that moment of just kind of awkwardness, right? That even if you do it with the best kid gloves, that happens. How do you then package them back up and then pull out so you don't get stuck there?
Yeah, I think really it's after, I've stepped down, we've dug in, we are kind of monitoring the outcomes together, looking at, here's the goal we're still working on. We're monitoring the outcomes together. Things are now heading in the right direction. We are accomplishing what we are working together to accomplish, or we've solved that problem we're working to solve. And it's at that point when I then kind of start to back myself back out and give them the kind of that space again, that kind of grace again to be able to now take the kind of full reins and be able to lead that effort again with just kind of some high level oversight or check-ins, and being able to kind of go back to just monitoring the data and the outcomes that they produce on the work that they're doing.
And then what kind of encouragement do you provide for these leaders after the fact? Like, is there some example of something you would say after the fact, when you're like, okay, things have stabilized and they're good? What's something you've said or you would say in that situation?
Think generally it's just always recognizing them and thanking them for the work and for the time that they've spent with me, and the kind of the work that we've done together to kind of move whatever that issue is forward, solve whatever problem we were solving together. And, thanking them for that work, and being encouraging about kind of leading that now forward on their own.
That makes them open to the next time you might come knocking on their door, right? And maybe that setback for them that you had to get involved became the setup for their future success, right? Like, okay, I now know how important this is, and I make sure I do it right next time. Wonderful, wonderful. What's next for you and DSH? Anything on the horizon? And maybe where can folks stay connected with you? Or, where are you out? Are you on LinkedIn or, Insta Twitter or whatever the heck the things are called these days?
Well, let's see, for DSH, I would say that we have been working really hard to change the paradigm for how individuals that are committed to the department, individuals with serious mental illness who are justice involved, how they are provided treatment. And we've really been working to expand community-based treatment and diversion opportunities for the individuals that we serve, and really try to reverse that kind of trend of criminalization of individuals with serious mental illness, and the trend of institutionalization as well. As far as, me and generally try to keep a private profile, but LinkedIn is where you'll probably find me the easiest.
Well, wonderful. Stephanie, thank you so much for what you do, both for the patients that you are treating and the communities that they come from, and the surrounding communities that they're in, and for those 12,000 incredibly hardworking and compassionate workers that you have in that organization who are just doing, in my opinion, God's work. So thank you for all of those things and for your time out of your busy schedule today.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.